Welcome to the Rotary Club of Milwaukee. I'm President Steve Chevalier, Director of Zilber Limited and the Zilber Family Foundation. This is the first virtual meeting we've had in 107 years, so it's a historic event. As we gather virtually, I'd like to maintain our tradition of reciting the Pledge of Allegiance before we start, so please stand for our small audience here and virtually if you wish. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So for the invocation today, we thought we would just do a couple of inspirational quotes that we've found. Here's a short reflection from President Theodore Roosevelt, which seems to apply to the Rotary idea of service and gratitude. Let's remember that as much has been given us, much will be expected from us. And that true homage comes from the heart as well as from the lips. And it shows itself in deeds. And also, Rotary friend Annette Robertson shared some quotes from Bill Gates in a recent blog he had on the meeting of the COVID-19 crisis. We won't read all of them because there's quite a few, but a couple of them are very worth reading. One, it's reminding us that we are all equal, regardless of our culture, religion, occupation, financial situation, or how famous we are. This disease treats all equally. Perhaps we should also, too, treat other people equally. If you don't believe me, just ask Tom Hanks. Another, he said, it's reminding us that our true work is not our job. That is what we do, not what we were created to do. Our true work is to look after each other, to protect each other, and to be of benefit to one another. It sounds very Rotarian. Another one, it's reminding us to keep our egos in check. It's reminding us that no matter how great we think we are or how great others think we are, a virus can bring the world to a standstill. And lastly, it's reminding us that we can be patient or we can panic. We can either understand that this type of situation has happened many times before in history and will pass, or we can panic and see it as the end of the world and consequently cause ourselves more harm than good. So we thought these were all good ways to start the meeting today. Thanks for joining us today. We're live streaming this virtual meeting with the help of the Milwaukee Press Club and WisPolitics, so our thanks go out to them for their support. We hope this will be the first of many offerings like this in these uncertain times. However, as we move to a safer at home plan tomorrow, Wednesday, we will not be able to live stream from Memorial Hall anymore, as this place will be shut down for a while. So we'll be looking at alternative ways for delivering programming, most likely using Zoom, which is a great tool. For example, next week, Chip Duncan, a native of Milwaukee and an American filmmaker, author, and photographer, known principally for documentaries on history, current affairs, travel, and natural history, will offer a program via Zoom. He'll talk about his recent documentary, Tolkien and Lewis, which discusses a conversation between author C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien, and their friend Hugo Dyson about mythology, reality, imagination, and faith. It's a nice change of pace from the news stories that seem to be dominating our lives today. And if you haven't tried Zoom yet, now is a good time. We had 3 very successful Zoom sessions last Friday, thanks to Beth Heller, one of our great members, for leading the sessions, and to all those who virtually participated. We plan on holding more orientations tomorrow, Wednesday, March 25th, at 9 a.m. and at 10:30 a.m. We'll schedule more classes based on demand, so if you're interested in learning how to use this great tool, let Michelle know. In addition to our Zoom orientations, we'll have a Zoom coffee connector, virtually gathering this Thursday morning, and a Zoom beer connector, we can't forget our beer, Thursday evening. We'll share info on how to sign up at the end of this program. As always, guests are welcome at our social and volunteer events, so just let the office know if you have someone who would like to join us. Also, a very hearty thank you to the Rotarians, friends, and members of Rotary who sorted food at Feeding America last Saturday morning. At this time, as many of people in our community are facing heightened food insecurity, it's important that we all help when we can. And now on to the program. We have a very special guest today, Dr. Bob Gleeson. Bob developed his scientific and modeling interest in pandemics while working at Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company. It started in 1983 with the AIDS epidemic, then H5N1, or the avian flu, then SARS, then MERS, and now COVID-19. Dr. Bob, as we like to call him here at the club, was the Vice President Medical Director at NML for 27 years. Then he went on to Frederick in the Medical College of Wisconsin as an associate professor for 10 years. He's now the medical consultant to the American Council of Life Insurance Insurers, a national organization. He's currently writing his 5th book. This one can be taking charge of our own end-of-life matters. He's been an active member of the Rotary Club of Milwaukee since 2017, and I bet he wishes he had joined earlier. I know we do. Without further ado, here's Dr. Bob.
Thank you, Steve. Notice that Steve and I kept safe distance as we walked up to the stage and away from it. I'm delighted to talk to you today about COVID-19, not because it's a fun topic, but because it's a topic that we all have to understand better and a little differently. Because knowledge gives us strength. It gives us the strength, if nothing else, to endure or understand what might be coming. You know, COVID-19 is real, it's personal, it's historic, and it's scary. It requires a personal sacrifice of all of us in order to make everyone better. Social distancing and self-isolation basically stop our important personal interactions. We can't hug a grandchild. We can't shake hands when we do a business deal. All of this feels very funny. We can't console somebody at a funeral. This is not the way we want to live our lives, and it's a burden that makes everything harder. The news we see seems bad, and it also seems to be getting worse. So we need knowledge. We need some understanding so we can move forward with this. This is a slide, and there is a link at the end of my talk to this site. This is from Johns Hopkins. It is updated almost continuously. This is the world case count as of this morning at 8 a.m. 390,000 cases, 17,000 deaths, 100,000 recovered. The bottom right-hand corner of the yellow bars shows the case count for the day. You can also change that to show the cumulative case count, but I kept it as the case count for the day. You can then zoom in on a country. So on the left-hand side, you can click on a country, and it will give you the cases for that country and the number of deaths in that country. So as of 8 a.m. this morning, America had 46,000 cases. Anybody want to guess how many cases we had a week ago? 5,000. This chart also shows that we have 593 deaths so far. I have gone further in this chart, and I clicked on Milwaukee County. And so there's a box right next to the 46,000. There's a little box. You can see it looks a little out of place. And that lists the number of cases and deaths in Milwaukee County. And that is also continuously updated. So it's a wonderful way to keep track of the cases as they're happening. Now, everybody has laughed about Italy and said Italy was disorganized or chaotic or their healthcare system didn't work. Keep that thought in mind for about 6 slides. Keep also in mind the fact this slide was made, I believe, on the 22nd of this month from data from about the 19th. This is the number of cases once each country passed 100 cases. And America is following exactly where Italy was. We may, in fact, be now moving ahead of Italy, but I don't have updated slide data to show you that. When the epidemic ebbs, when we can come out of our caves, we'll know that the case count for each day is less than it was the day before. So those little bars and the yellow bars in the lower right-hand corner will begin to go down. It will show that either our social distancing is working or the virus has mutated to something more benign. It might go on a summer vacation. An effective vaccine has been developed. All these things would make it ebb. Or we reached herd immunity. Herd immunity means that so many people have been infected and developed immunity to the COVID virus that we could have a social gathering of 100 people in a room. Somebody could be infected, but not enough. There are only 30 people in the room who are not infected. And therefore, the virus will not gain transmission like it does today. That's herd immunity. So one of those things has to happen. Now, remember I talked about how we thought Italy was chaotic? Look carefully at the bottom bars, the yellow bars. For the last 3 days, the number of new cases in Italy has declined. This shows that their severe quarantine measures that they put in place 12 days ago are starting to work. Now, the WHO is not going to make any announcements about this until we have 5 days worth of data. 2 days doesn't do it for us. We need more data than this. But this is showing promise that the severe measures that Italy took have paid off. Here's another interesting slide. This is once again the number of cases, so this is a cumulative case count, since the 100th case was reported in each of these countries. It's very hard to read. It's very small print. But I want you to notice the red arrow at the top. That's the United States. We are not lagging behind in our number of case or the case growth. I'd also like you to look at the blue arrows. The top one marks South Korea. South Korea is an almost flat line. Now, most of their cases came from a church. We'll talk about that in a moment. We also have at the bottom Hong Kong and Singapore, which despite neighboring China, have very low case counts. Why? Because they have done extremely good positive identification with testing. They test. Then they identify positives, and then they identify every one of their contacts. This is a partial map. The complete map is too complex to put up here. This takes the church in South Korea that people attended. And within a couple of days, they had identified everybody in the church who was infected, every contact they had had, and whether they were infected. The little, I believe the red is infected, and I forget what blue is. And then all of their contacts. Within days, they did this. I don't have my cell phone with me. They did this by cell phone tracing. So if I was infected and I had a meeting with Mary and Bill and Steve, my phone would show that our phones were close to each other. And they would then go out and test Mary and Steve and Bill. And they would find out whether they were positive or not. But they would begin to isolate me, and anybody that I had contact with would also be isolated. But that's how you get to that kind, the blue arrows on that kind of map. America is not built for that kind of system or surveillance. So we have to do social distancing. Now, we have to do social distancing smarter. The pictures from the beaches in Florida were appalling. And by the way, they were of all ages. We all talk about spring breakers. Lots of retirees were down there on the beach too. Florida has no income tax. They get their $93 billion budget is all met by tourists. All the taxes on everything a tourist does and sales taxes on new property fund a $93 billion budget. So they have to be careful when they slow down their state, and it was a very difficult choice that Governor DeSantis made. And he's finally made it. Nationwide, if everybody did social distancing better and more rigidly, stay in your house for 2 weeks. This is how we're going to have this thing ebb. This is how we're going to open a business. We have to be very strict, and no exceptions. Everybody stay home. Now, that's going to require a lot of work to get food and food pantries and social needs and things, but we're Americans, we can do this. At the end of that, if you were infected, you knew you were infected and you were sick, but you did not give the disease to anybody else. So the transmission died way down. At the end of 2 weeks, we must have a rigorous program. We're now moving, if this happens, to vertical isolation rather than horizontal. We're kind of in horizontal isolation right now. Everybody's in isolation. We need to test. We need to find who's positive and they need to stay in quarantine. If you're not infected and you made it through the 2 weeks and you're not sick, you can return to work. We also at that time have to identify everybody who is at risk. Now, it's easy to put an age number down. I'm at risk. I don't regard myself as that, so I have trouble with that. There are going to be a lot of people who are told they're at high risk of getting this disease, and they're not going to like hearing that news. But they're going to have to hear it, and they have to stay home because they're the ones who get sick and go to the hospital. The name of the game now is reduce the burden on the hospitals. So when we talk about social distancing, this little YouTube video is a marvelous piece that explains why what we're doing is so crucial. Can you play it, Michelle? The video will be shared later, I'm told. Can they hear it now? We're having buffering problems with the, you may be able to hear this in a second.
This virus is unforgiving. It spreads before you even know you've caught it. And it tricks you into believing that it's nothing more than a little influenza. For many of us, it may not be much more than the flu. And so it could be very confusing as to why schools are closed, restaurants are shuttered, and now the virus is taking what's left of our precious liberty. But the real problem is not the 80% who will get over this in a week. It's the 20% of patients, the older, those that are immunocompromised, those that have other medical problems, who are going to need a bit more support, some oxygen, or maybe a ventilator, life support. We do amazing things like this to save patients in our American hospitals and across the world every single day, but we can't take care of everyone at once. And we can't keep that low mortality promise if we can't provide the support that our patients need. There's no vaccine or readily available antiviral to help stem the tide. All we have to slow the spread is distance, social distance. And if we let every single patient with this infection infect 3 more people, and then each of them infect 2 or 3 more people, there won't be a hospital bed when my mother can't breathe very well, or when yours is coughing too much. So in my house, we've made a lot of sacrifices. We don't go out anymore. This is the first time I've left my house in some days because I'm leading our efforts and emergency planning from my home. These extreme restrictions may seem, in the end, a little anticlimactic because it's really hard to feel like you're saving the world when you're watching Netflix from your couch. But if we do this right, nothing happens. Yeah. A successful shelter in place means that you're going to feel like it was all for nothing. And you'd be right. Because nothing means that nothing happened to your family. And that's what we're going for here.
So that was
Being stuck at home all day,
Dr. Emily Langdon, University of Chicago Chief of Infectious Disease. And that piece summarizes what we have to do. Watching Netflix is a sacrifice we have to make to keep everybody safe. But the way she said it is just gorgeous. I love it. Isn't she a good speaker? So in America, containment has largely failed. It has failed because we've had insufficient tests. You can't contain anything if you can't measure it. On March 1st, South Korea had done 100,000 tests. They were accurate. America had done fewer than 500. We have no idea who in this country is infected. We have no idea who is transmitting this. This is an abysmal failure. Even Dr. Fauci has called this a failure. And I really love and respect Dr. Fauci. Even now, some people are violating this whole idea of social distancing or isolation. That makes the governor have to go further in ordering more closures, as he's likely to do later today, because people haven't paid attention. Those who paid attention and stayed home are going to be asked to stay home even more, but many have not yet stayed home. I'm pleased to say that the governors and mayors of this country have stuck together, and the governors of Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Ohio have daily conference calls among themselves so they understand what each state is doing, what they're worried about, and they try to act in concert. Because it becomes a regional thing. If we can contain it regionally, we're a little better off since we're not containing it nationwide. And I'm really proud of the work that the governors and local officials have done. We're actually in pretty good, darn good shape in Wisconsin. Given that we don't have enough tests, tests are reserved only if they're going to make a difference in the clinical care you get in the hospital. Otherwise, we don't have enough tests yet to do them because you're concerned. And I'm going to get to what you should do if you think you're infected in a few moments. So now we move to protecting the hospitals. They are all preparing for a surge of patients. But it's our job now as a society to get them the testing they need to tell who's infected, because they have to protect themselves to a higher level if you're treating an infected person. We have to get enough protective equipment, personal protective equipment. We can't be asking our doctors and nurses and aides and technicians to reuse equipment. We have to keep them safe. And when we do that, we still need to do social distancing until we can find out who's infected. So now we're sort of at the prepare for the worst and hope for the best. New York City is having a surge of hospital cases. We don't have that many hospital beds. We certainly don't have that many ICU beds. New York is scrambling like mad. They're making Javits Center into a 1,000-bed hospital. Patients who are ill but don't require intensive care unit level care are going to be in Javits Center. There they'll be treated and monitored, and when they get sicker, they will go to the hospital. If they choose comfort care, they may get it in the Javits Center, I don't know. If they get well and can go home, they'll go home. But New York City is out of hospital beds, and this is just the start. It will get worse. Governor Cuomo, who gives, by the way, absolutely beautiful press conferences that show leadership, has been screaming about the need for more equipment as he prepares for the surge. He sees numbers that you and I don't see. I think I have pretty good data. These guys all have numbers that dwarf what I see, as they should. And they are very worried. We are getting to the point where we are planning on how we're going to triage intensive care unit patients. We simply do not have enough beds. Who goes? Who doesn't go? Because if you don't go to the intensive care unit bed and you need it, you're going to die. Or your odds of dying just went way up. Mortality in the intensive care unit is already bad enough. But when we start to have discussions about who gets intensive care, that's very, very new to Americans. It's new to Italy, and Italy's struggling with the same problem. So how do you protect yourself right now? Avoid crowds. Avoid crowds. In this room right now, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of us. I don't think we're any closer than 20 feet from each other. That's about right. Nobody shook hands. Nobody touched anything. We've got sanitizers all over this building. That's as it should be. Everybody should keep this much distance. Wash your hands often. Every time you go out, wash your hands. Sanitizer, fine. I happen to like soap and water for 20 seconds. By the way, the happy birthday song or whatever little jingle you want to sing starts after you have the soap on your hands. It doesn't start when you turn on the water. And keep sufficient foods and medicines and supplies at home, so if somebody in your household was positive and you went on strict lockdown, you could survive. Now, we all have friends, and if somebody called me and said, Bob, I need some chicken soup and toilet paper, we'd drive some over. There's no doubt about that. We'd leave it at the door. We'll care for each other as neighbors or as Rotarians. Anybody, Rotary called that. We'd all do that. But you need to know that you can make it if somebody in your household gets infected. So what happens when you get infected with this little bug? This is an RNA virus. It doesn't really have a life. It exists only to reproduce. The other RNA virus you're familiar with is HIV. It only seeks to reproduce. This virus, one infected person spreads it to 2.4 other people. That means that unchecked, one infected person will spread it to 3,000 people in 6 weeks. It's a respiratory problem. It goes in through your nose, mainly, or if you're touching yourself and you're touching your nose or mouth, you can transmit it that way. It lives in respiratory membranes, nose, back of your throat, and the entire lining of your lungs, top to bottom. When it's there, it kills these, it attaches to the lining cells through an ACE2 receptor protein, and it kills the cells eventually. The cells slough off into your lungs, and that's the irritant that makes you cough. And the cough gets really bad because you have a lot of dead cells and junk in your lungs, and you're trying to get rid of it. And you're trying to get rid of it as fast as the virus is trying to kill the cells to make more of it. The severity of this lung damage and your cough represents the severity of the damage that's caused by the virus. Now, you can go to the hospital with the cough, a severe cough and shortness of breath. You're not going to go for just a cough. You're going to go when you have a cough and shortness of breath, because now you're having trouble getting oxygen. You can survive that. And a lot of people go to the hospital and get supported in oxygen and IVs, and they sort of live through that and come home. Some people, the virus continues to grow, and because the virus is overwhelming their lungs and causing now other organ failure, they may need to go to the intensive care unit. The other thing that sometimes happens is called a cytokine storm. Your body's ability to fight the infection goes out of control. It gets to be too much fight. And we attack our own body, and we fill our own lungs with chemicals that are designed to fight the infection but are now interfering with our ability to breathe, or they're interfering with our kidneys. It's called a cytokine storm. It's a very bad marker. But it's one of the ways that the virus kills. So if you're infected with the virus, for some percentage, we have no clue. We have no idea how many people it is. Don't forget that we have to know how many people are really infected with this virus before we'll really know what the mortality rate is. Right now, the mortality rates are pretty high because we're counting people who are in the hospital. I tend to think it's going to end up somewhere around 1 or 1.5% when we're done, which is lower than if you took those first slides I showed with the numbers around the country. Just look at the deaths in the top right-hand column and divide by the number of cases at the top of the left-hand column, and you'll get the international mortality rate. Or you could get it for any country. But I think it's going to be about 1%. Of those who are symptomatic, 80% will be ill at home with a fever, muscle aches, and a deep cough. It's not pleasant. It's not a cold. It's not the flu. It's worse. 20% are going to get short of breath and have to go to the hospital. That's a big number. 5%, or 25% of the 20%, are going to need to go to an ICU. And 2.5%, 50% of the 5% in the ICU, are likely to die. That's a horrendous ICU mortality rate. So if you're infected, isolate yourself at home. And I don't mean sort of, I mean strict. If you live in a household with 4 other people, you're going to your bedroom and you get your own bathroom. And you do not eat with them, and you do not watch television with the rest of your family. You notify your physician by phone or MyChart. If you need to go to the hospital, call them first. Let them know you're coming. Don't walk in the emergency room and say, I'm sick with COVID, I think. Because you've just exposed everybody else who's standing there. And this is when a test will be done, so they know how to treat you. We'd like to do a mortality slide where I could show it to you by age, where I could look at everything. This is the best I can get out of the CDC that's kind of recent. The vertical columns, they come close to 100%. They don't quite add up. My actuarial friends have already figured that out. But by age, I'm putting this up here to show that under age 20, very little ICU, no deaths. This has been true pretty much around the world. It's never zeros Those numbers will go up, obviously, but it's pretty low. 20 to 64, they get some increasing numbers. A moderate number of those are going to go to the ICU, but there are relatively fewer deaths, fewer than half are going to die. Now look what happens when we go to the group over age 65. The mortality really goes up. Now this is not, I can't say that of all 65s, don't read this horizontally, this is vertically. All this is doing is showing that a lot of the mortality with this disease is in the elderly. We'll get better numbers in probably another 2 weeks where you could say, of the 65-year-olds who were sick, this is how many went to the hospital, and this is how many went to the ICU, and this is how many died. But we're not quite there yet. That was a study from the CDC, Center for Disease Control, on 600 people. So now the personal and scary stuff. If you are over 65 or have underlying conditions, update your advance directives. Have a discussion with your family members. If I go to the hospital, do I want to be in the intensive care unit? Do I want to be on a ventilator for 2 or 3 weeks? Ask yourself, do you want comfort care, palliative care? The hospital is still going to take care of you. They'll keep you comfortable, but they're not going to do everything to save your life. You move to a different phase of care. Have a discussion with your family and your agents so that they know those things. The wrong time to have that discussion is when you're in the hospital, because when you're in the hospital, by the way, your family's not with you. You're alone. So make these decisions ahead of time. So our most urgent needs right now are leadership, leadership, leadership. We need a communication. We need clarity. We need a plan. Any good business in America starts with leadership, communication, and a plan. Not 2 days. We need a short-term, mid-term, and long-term plan. We still need to self-isolate until we can get on top of this. We need tests. We need to protect first responders and healthcare workers. We need more hospital beds. We need ICU beds and ventilators. And we need safe and effective treatments. We need a vaccine. We need food and safety for those who are suddenly unemployed and have no resources. And we need an economic off-ramp. We need some way to keep the economy functioning without endangering our citizens. We need our kids back in schools. Moms want them out of the house. They want the socialization. They need to talk with their own peers about what this has been like for them. But we need an off-ramp. A few reminders. It's our time. It's our time in history to know what we're made of, to know if we have the courage and the strength to sacrifice like we need to. Sacrifice is not thinking less of yourself. It requires thinking of yourself less. To take off on Rick Warren's statement. But I think it summarizes what we're asking everybody in America and the world to do. And there are the resources that I happen to like. The first one is from Harvard. It's an excellent overall resource. The second one is from the Center for Infectious Disease from the University of Minnesota. They run a superb, absolutely superb website. All the maps and all the graphics references are there. And then there's clinical trials, so you can follow, if it interests you, what drugs and vaccines are working. Because we will get through this. This is not the end of the world. This is an opportunity to be brave. It's an opportunity to be smart, and it's an opportunity to be caring. But we can do this. Thank you. Don't you like that rousing round of applause I get from all 8 people here?
I have one question.
Mary has a question.
Audience here. Do you know how our local hospitals, are there plans
The question was, do I know how Milwaukee hospitals are doing? Every hospital is nervous. Every hospital is planning. Elective surgery has been canceled because they want to keep A, the rooms available, B, not use protective gear inappropriately. They need to save every bit they have. Every hospital is planning for what to do if we get a surge of patients. Milwaukee County has done well. We're relatively low on the case count spectrum. Anybody remember what that number was? No, we don't have 400 cases. That's the state. We have 400 cases in the state. I think we have 120 in Milwaukee County. Beg pardon? Bill says it's up to 206. I do not know of their plans for other beds. I am certain that they have thought of them. I don't expect them to talk about it. I am certain they have thought about how they will handle excess demands on the ICU. Many hospital wards are empty right now. Nothing elective is going on. Those patients aren't there. Those are empty beds that we will use. So they've done everything they can to have the space available in anticipation of a surge. Okay, the next question that I got by email was, would I comment on chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine? Oh me, oh my, where do I even begin? All of this hype is based on a 2012 study during the MERS, Mideast Respiratory Syndrome, outbreak, because that's also caused by coronavirus, of 26 patients followed for 6 days, and the test was designed to look at viral counts in your nose. They took a nasal swab twice a day, counted the viruses, and the question was, do the drugs lower the virus count? It had nothing to do with saving lives. Of the 26 people in the study, 6 withdrew from side effects. Of the remaining 20, 1 went home, 4 went to the ICU, and 1 died. Now that was within 6 days. After 6 days, it's over. There was no control group. It wasn't designed to see whether we could save lives. Maybe it'll work. We don't know. But because of the huge pressure and the questions that have been raised by Dr. Trump, NYU is now starting a large study to determine the effectiveness. So they'll take 1,000 people, I don't know how many, just guessing. Half of them will get the drug, half of them will get placebo. 6 weeks later, we'll know, was there a difference in the groups? If it works, I think that's wonderful. All of us want something to work. There are 65 drugs currently being tried. Some of them were developed for Ebola. We know that they haven't worked very well. The HIV drugs haven't worked very well. There are some other drugs that are showing a little promise, but it's still a little early. Where are we with the vaccine? Vaccine development is complex. It sounds like it ought to be easy. We know really good science now. We can make a pretty good product that we think is going to work. Anybody remember what happened when Gerald Ford decided everybody should get a swine flu vaccine? The epidemic turned out to be a nothing. But the vaccine gave hundreds of people Guillain-Barré, and they went to the ICU with respiratory troubles. That's what we're trying to avoid. You can't just make a vaccine and ship it out. So we have to test it for safety. I forget how many people we're testing. It's a relatively small group. Then we'll test it for efficacy. That will take a large group because we're trying to reduce the number of infections. And we'll give it to 100,000 people to see, did they have fewer infections than this other group of 100,000? And then we have to manufacture it, and then we have to distribute it. That's why we think it's going to be 12 to 18 months. Mary, did you have another question? Mary, people are emailing their questions to Mary.
Yes. Well, this is kind of a tough one for me to say out loud, but our Rotary friend Joe Robertson, if the person is over 90 or is ready to make way in home levels, stay at home.
The question was, if a person wanted to choose comfort care, could they do it at home and be assured of getting the care? Comfort care is frequently provided by palliative care physicians and palliative care nurse practitioners, or I call them advanced practice providers, who are just wonderful. I don't know of their capacity to make home visits. They would have to have all of the protective equipment. I think you could go to the hospital and you could say, I am here for comfort care. I can't breathe at home. I am desperately uncomfortable. And they may well put you in a hospice type of area and make accommodations that way. I think it's important to assure people that every hospital will keep people comfortable if that's what they want. We're not, the question is not, they'll provide that care. I don't know if they can provide it at home. It's important to assure people that if they choose comfort care, they will be taken care of.
Beth Heller asks, if you're successful in Wisconsin flattening the curve, when do you think you might end
Oh.
not successful?
So the question was, when do I think we'll end social distancing? Boy, isn't this a difficult question? Everybody wants to know the answer. And we all want to get back to some semblance of normal. And I think we're going to have to approach it this way of the strict isolation for a while, get a reduction in the number of cases or flattening of the curve, and then test people. And I think then we can safely open up businesses and do vertical kind of isolation where we keep the people who are at higher risk further away. Lower risk people can get out in the community and continue their work. If we did it in Wisconsin, what happens to the Illinois people who are driving through on their way up to Door County? Door County's issued, was it a proclamation or something that said, please don't visit? And if you come, socially quarantine yourself for 2 weeks. They're worried about people from other areas coming to their summer home or second home and getting sick and overloading the local hospitals, which aren't made for this. The rural hospitals aren't made with the kind of capacity that our big hospitals have here. I have a question, will this go away in the summer? And we don't know. Ask me in 4 months and I'll have a really good answer on whether it's going to go away in the summer. I will say that there's one study from MIT, just published, that says this virus appears more easily spread between temperatures of 37 Fahrenheit and 63 degrees Fahrenheit. And a certain humidity, but I forgot the humidity percentage. That said, they think there will be fewer cases when it warms up. Wouldn't that be great? A lull, even a lull, would allow us to get the equipment to the hospitals, would allow us to get the tests, would allow us to be 3 or 4, 5 months further along in vaccine or drug therapy. All of that will continue apace. But that would be great if we got a summer lull. So that's all I can do is be hopeful that that is correct. Okay, I'll make 2 announcements. First is Mary's getting questions by text. Her phone number is 414-840-9623. Second announcement, this production will be, it's being streamed on YouTube now. It will be made into a more professional looking YouTube later this afternoon, and the office will probably release it tomorrow morning. And the slides will be posted to the website, and they'll be available and show on the YouTube video.
Is there a significant danger out walking?
Is there, that's a great question. Is there a significant danger, was that the word, Mary? If you're out walking, as long as you keep a social distance? No. Please go outside, get some exercise, but do keep the social distance. Andrew Cuomo had a meltdown the other day. He went to New York City, and yes, people were in the park, and the parks were packed. There was no social distancing. He watched the kids play basketball. There was no social distancing. He watched soccer games. Well, there was some social distancing once in a while, but we have to take this seriously. And so go for a walk, go to Audubon, go to Whitnall, go to our county parks, but don't get crowded. And if the parking lot's full, by the way, go to a different park. I do. So Mary's question was, do I have an opinion? There is some indication from Washington, D.C. that in just a few days, we will have a significant reduction, announced reduction, in the stay-at-home orders. I have a opinion on that. You can guess what it is. I'm a scientist. I'm also a dad and a grandfather. And the inability to see or connect with family is difficult. The inability to go to a funeral is horrible. I mean, we have to figure out some middle ground. The economic damage being done is horrendous. We need to figure out some damage being done. But we also have to realize that the numbers coming out of, in this case, it's going to be New York City, in the next 10 days will be horrendous. When I put up that slide that showed America had almost 50,000 cases, a week ago we had 5. This thing is doubling every 4 to 6 days. So I don't know that, I think we will be in much worse shape in a couple of days, and it will be harder to reduce the stay-at-home order. So we need a plan. We need a clear plan on how we're going to get out of this stay-at-home thing we got in. Mary just told me that the president, in his, I assume he's having a news conference this noon, has said we should be back at work by April 12th. Is that what you said, Mary? I, again, I come back to the idea of, I need a plan. I need a plan. I don't want to go endanger people. I need some real clarity on how that would work. If he has a plan, and if it's doable, then I may be okay.
Here's a question from past President Tim Birkenstock. We are measuring this virus as a worldwide problem, yet when we speak of solutions, we only speak of research being done in the U.S. Much work has been done in other countries. Shouldn't we be using that information to accelerate the work?
Well, the question concerns international sharing of information about the science, medication development, vaccine development. It's my understanding that there has been incredible sharing. China decoded the DNA, or the RNA rather, the gene of the virus, and very quickly sent it to any country that wanted it in the World Health Organization in an effort so they could start to make their own vaccines, because or their own tests. Most pharmaceutical companies are global. Today, there's not just a limitation on American trials right now. I think that most science is just being freely posted and shared. So I think there's a tremendous amount of good sharing that shows the kind of international cooperation that should be going on.
A couple of questions here on the food chain.
Feeding America would love some donations. This question is on food.
What's the risk of getting food from carryout?
Oh dear, my wife's in the room. She and I have different opinions on this.
Well, why don't you give us both points?
She says no, and I say yes. Yeah, because I'm the cook. I don't know. I will give you my answer for why I think it's safe. I think it's safe because food handlers are wearing gloves. They change gloves all the time. Food handlers are not mixing with people. They're in their kitchen with they had to downsize all their staffs too, a small number of people. It's not as though they're intermingling. The food is safe. It's been cooked. We don't get it in our stomachs. Well, a little bit, but the risk is pretty low on food. And I regard the bags that you're given as safe. Yes, it can survive for 24 hours on cardboard or paper, but the people who are giving you the bag are wearing plastic gloves. Now, the other side of this says, I don't know where that person has been, and I don't know what's going on in their home, or whether they're infected, or whether they came to work ill because they need the money to take home to their family. So there are two sides of that. So tonight, I will go for takeout, and Jane will have...
Why is the COVID-19 worse than N1H1, or
Why is the response more intense than N1? It's H1N1. Why is COVID a worse disease than some of the other influenzas? All the H and N strains are an influenza kind of strain. COVID is different. There are only 6 substrains of the coronavirus that cause human disease. 3 of those are the cold. The others are MERS and SARS, and now this one. It is just, we don't know, it's just a bad actor. If you self-quarantine for 2 weeks, what's the point of returning to a public area if the virus, and by that I mean they assume that somebody else out there in the community has the virus. You did your civic duty. You sacrificed by staying home for 2 weeks. somebody else didn't, and they're infected, you are still going to be exposed. If we're doing a pretty good job of staying home and isolating and keeping social distance. If 2 or 3 weeks passes and Trump says, it's over, you can go outside, I will still keep social distance. I will still not hug. I will still not shake hands. I will still wash my hands. I will still sanitize elevator buttons. So I think that you have to keep yourself safe until you're assured that everybody else keeps themselves safe also. And then, Mary, it's after 1 o'clock. I don't want to go too long. I know that people, they won't hurt my feelings. They're not walking out of the room. They just signed off quietly. And I get all that, but we'll take, okay.
What about pregnancy?
Are pregnant women or their babies at risk? I'm sorry, we just don't know. There is no data yet. And unfortunately, we will not know the answer to that for months to, what did you say, Mary?
I said 9 months.
9 months, maybe 6 months. We'll know more in 9 to 12 months. So I thank you very much for your attention. Been a pleasure. And now I turn the program back over to Steve, and I'm going to leave before he comes on. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. That was terrific. I almost hate to bring up another virus, but Rotary has been a world leader in the effort to eradicate polio. So in honor of your speaking to us today, we're going to purchase 50 more doses of the vaccine to get us that much closer to eliminating that particular virus in the world and have it be polio-free at some point. And also in appreciation for your time with us today, we'd also like to present you with one of our connecting mugs. Now, I took a drink out of this one, so you can't have it. But we will get you a fresh one that you can run through the dishwasher at your leisure. So, just a few closing announcements. See your screen for some of our upcoming virtual events. Visit the links in the descriptions that are on the screen below to register for our orientations tomorrow and our connector meetings on Thursday. And remember, friends are invited and guests. So let's go out and do some good in the world this week. Even if it's only to make a needed contribution or to call a friend who is isolated and ask, hey, how are you doing? And most importantly, stay safe and stay home. This meeting is adjourned.